Hello everyone. Today we will learn the next topics in railway engineering. I will try to cover the topics, that is we will see what is gauge, its types, the factors which are considered for selection of gauge. Then we will see what are called as track fittings and fastenings and what are the different types of fittings and fastenings used in the railway. So first, what is gauge? Gauge is nothing but the clear minimum horizontal distance between the inner faces of the two rails forming a track. In this diagram we can see these are the two rails. This is the outer face of the rail and this is the inner face of the rail. The distance between the inner faces of the rail is nothing but gauge. Wheel gauge. The distance between the inner faces of a pair of wheels is called as wheel gauge. So in this image we can see this. These are the two rails and the distance between the inner faces of the two rails is nothing but the gauge. Similarly, wheel gauge is the distance between the inner faces of a pair of wheels. दोन wheelsच्या inner facesचा distance is nothing but wheel gauge. Then we will move towards the type of gauges. Depending upon the gauge width, they are classified into four types. First is called as standard gauge, which is also known as broad gauge, which is denoted by B dot G. The gauge width is 1.67 meters in case of this type of gauge. Then second one is the meter gauge, that is denoted by M dot G. It has width of 1 meter. Third one is the narrow gauge. It has width of 0.762 meters. And the last one is the light gauge, that is also called as feeder track gauge, which has a width of 0.610 meters. So what are the factors that helps to select the gauge of the rails? So there are many factors. First is the cost of construction. The cost of construction slightly increases the initial cost, but it do not impact greaterly the selection of gauge. So slightly increase in the initial cost due to increase in the cost of the earthwork and increase in the acquisition of land for the permanent track. Why the cost of construction may increase? If a broader gauge is used, the cost of earthwork will be more and also the acquisition of land will increase and thereby the cost of construction will also increase. But it has a lesser impact in the factors which helps in governing the selection of gauge. Whether the gauge will be broader gauge or a light gauge, the cost of construction it plays a less importance. In the selection of gauge, it plays a less importance as compared to the other factors. So the second factor, that is volume and nature of traffic. So for heavier load and higher speed, we prefer wider gauge. Okay, if the load in the train is more and the train is running with a high speed, in that case the gauge, that is the inner distance between the faces of the rails, should be wider. The third factor is the development of the area. Use of narrow gauge for joining the underdeveloped areas with the developed areas. When a railway track has to be let down, which will connect the developed areas with the underdeveloped areas, at this point narrow gauge is referred. Okay, then comes the physical features of the country. In this type of factors, use of narrow gauge is preferred. because in hilly areas the BG and MG, that is broad gauge and meter gauge, is not possible because there is a greater steep, the slope is very steep and has sharp edges. Also, in plain areas where high speed is not required and low traffic is present, this narrow gauge can be used. Then the last factor which is used to choose the different gauges is the speed of the movement. We know that if we have seen in the volume and nature of traffic that for the higher speed, wider gauge is required. So, the speed of the train is proportional to the gauge. Higher the speed of the train, the distance between the inner faces, that is the gauge of the rail, should be higher. For higher speed, broad gauge is used. Then we will move towards the next topic, that is track fittings and fastenings. Why are these track fittings and fastenings used? What are these? These are the members which are used to keep the rails in positions. They are used to fix the rails on the chairs, fixed to the sleepers or directly onto the sleepers. These are nothing but the members which are used to connect the various components of the railway track to each other. So, fittings used in permanent way. What are the fittings that we use in permanent way? First one is the fish plate. Then we use the spikes. We use bolts, chairs, blocks, keys and plates. So we will see one by one. What is fish plate? Fish plates are used to maintain the continuity of the rails and allow expansion and contraction of the rail caused by the temperature variation. We know that a rail is of a particular length. So, for placing of the railway track, number of rails has to be connected to each other. So, to connect these rails to each other and to maintain the continuity of the track, fish plates are used. See, in this image we can see this is the one rail and this is the another rail. There is a gap. These two rails are different. To connect these two rails, this member is used, which is called as fish plate. It is also used to maintain the alignment of the horizontal rail. To maintain the alignment, to maintain the rail in the position, fish plates are used. Now we will move towards the second fitting material, that is bolts. These bolts are used to fix the various track components in position. See, we can see that fish plate is connected to the rails by using the bolts. So, there are many types of bolts. There are dog or hook bolts, which are also called as straight lip, having straight lip or sloping lips. Then there is a fish bolts and there are bolts. Now next we will see what are the spikes. See, this is the image showing the spikes. They are used to hold the rails to the wooden sleepers. These spikes are used to hold the rails with the wooden sleepers. They may be used with or without the bearing plates. Now, there are many different types of spikes, that is dog spikes, screw spikes, round spikes, standard spikes, elastic spikes. The main function of spikes is what? It connects the rails to the wooden sleepers. Then comes the bearing plates. So what is bearing plate? It is a rectangular plate which is made up of mild steel or cast iron. Okay, this is used below flat-footed rails to distribute the load on a large area of timber sleepers, particularly on the softened materials. See, these are the bearing plates. They are mainly made of mild steel or cast iron. Okay, and they are used below only flat-footed rails. They are used below flat-footed rails to distribute the load on a large area of timber. Timber sleepers are very soft category. So the soft category जे sleeper material असेल तर flat-footed rails स्लीपर्सला कनेक्ट करायला बिअरिंग प्लेट फ्लॅट फुटेड रेल्सच्या खाली अटॅच केले जातात दॅट आर नथिंग बट बिअर प्लेट्स. Then we will see what are chairs. These are the chairs which are used for holding the double-headed and bull-headed rails. Okay, chairs are used to hold the rails of double-headed and bull-headed. Double-headed means the rails having both the heads of same dimensions, and bull-headed one is small and one is of greater area. Okay, then comes the keys. These keys are the small tapered pieces of timbers on steel to fix the rails to the chairs and metal sleepers. See, we can see in the figure that this is a rail, this is the sleeper, wooden sleeper. First is the rail, second is the chair, third one is the BG rail. Here is a wooden key and this is the chair. So keys are the small tempered pieces of timber to fix the rails to the chairs. This is chair. To fix the rail with the chair, these keys are used. So last one is the blocks. When two rails run very close, small blocks are inserted in between the two rails and bolted to maintain the required distance. So you can see this. When two rails are very close to each other in this image, these two rails are very close to each other. So see, these are the small blocks which are inserted in between these two rails to maintain the required distance. These are nothing but the blocks. See, this is the actual image showing what are fish plates, what are spikes. So see, these are the rails, these are the fish plates, this is the nut or bolt, this is the nut, this is the fish plate bolt, this is a spike which is used to connect the rails to the sleepers.